Now then, how should the UK government respond to President Trump's comments about paracetamol and pregnancy? Because there is growing concern amongst medical professionals in this country after he linked the use of paracetamol to autism and urged pregnant women to avoid taking the drug.
The UK's National Autistic Society describes the President's announcement as dangerous and irresponsible. It's not what Matthew Pennycook, Minister for Housing, thought he was going to be talking about on the programme this morning. But of course, last week we were all besties with President Trump, gave him a massive state banquet and that wonderful royal visit. What are we saying about the President's claims this morning, Matthew Pennycook?
Morning, Susanna, and I'm sure you'll get onto housing and infrastructure very shortly. But on the President's comments, I'm going to choose my words very carefully here because I think we do have to, in any area of policy, follow the science. Obviously, the claims that the President's made in terms of the facts are unproven. We've got to be careful about stoking scepticism generally about immunisation. My advice to anyone watching would be to go and check out the NHS advice and guidance on this particular subject. And in terms of children with autism more widely, I think it's also important to say that we've got to have an SEND system that works effectively. That's why we're putting £1 billion of extra investment in. It's why we're giving local councils £740 million so they can put extra specialist provision into mainstream schools. So let's choose our words carefully. Let's follow the science when it comes to this and indeed any other matter.
He's got a track record for this kind of stuff, though, hasn't he? I mean, back in the days of COVID, he was talking about bleach being a cure and possibly being intravenously injected into the bloodstream. I mean, it must be very difficult for the UK government to juggle this kind of nonsense.
Well, I mean, and it's why I and other ministers don't provide a running commentary on every phrase or piece of language that the President of the United States uses. It is an incredibly important relationship for the UK, both for our economy, for our security. It's right that we have that close and special relationship with the President. That was in evidence during his state visit last week. But on these particular comments, the facts suggest, obviously, that the link is unproven. Let's be led by the science. Let's not stoke general scepticism about immunisation or generally. There's a problem here developing in terms of people buying misleading statements, not from the President, but more widely, about their use. We've got to be led by the science. Okay,
just to point out that we're not talking about immunisation and the link to autism. We're talking about paracetamol, painkiller in pregnancy and a link to autism. And just before we go on to talk about housing, so can we just establish that the UK government and medical authorities are not changing or reviewing their position on advice to pregnant women here in the UK?
No, we're not. But I make and I completely understand the point, Susanna. I make the general point about immunisation because we are seeing in America, in this country, a general push to confuse people about the benefits of immunisation and to sow scepticism in a way that I think is unhelpful. So I just make the wider point about immunisation, about the use of particular pharmaceuticals. But no, in direct answer to your question, the UK government's not changing its position, and I direct anyone to the NHS advice on paracetamol.
You are here to talk up infrastructure in this country, which sounds a bit dry, but actually it's very much at the heart of failed government policy going back 20, 30 years. We seem to have lost the ability in the UK to do big stuff. We couldn't do HS2. We can't seem to fix Hammersmith Bridge. It seems that almost every large project that we take on just sort of fizzles out into an endless miasma of nothing really happening. What's going to change?
Well, what's going to change is that we are going to get Britain building again. That's what we've committed to in our plan for change, and in particular when it comes to major economic infrastructure. We made clear that we were going to fast-track decisions on it, and I'm here to confirm today that that's precisely what we've done. We've honoured that commitment. We have taken the largest number of decisions on major economic infrastructure projects in the first year of any parliament in history, 21 last year, 20 approvals. It's gone up to 25 now post the Gatwick decision. And we're on course to make 150 decisions over the course of this parliament. That compares to the 57 that the previous government made. And it might seem, I understand, Richard, a dry subject to your viewers, but it's not a procedural question. It has real-world implications for working people across the country. Our failure to build adequate infrastructure in all manner of the respects has meant longer commutes. It's meant more expensive flights. It's meant more unreliable water supplies. I mean, your viewers may not know this. We have not built a reservoir in this country for over 30 years. That is not a sustainable position. That is why we're getting Britain building again. Okay. And it's why we'll increase the number of these decisions going through our, for example, provisions in our planning and infrastructure bill, which make the consenting process around these major economic infrastructure projects far speedier, far more simple.
I feel like I spoke to you on this programme about the pledge to build 1.5 million homes, and you guaranteed that it was going to get done. However, in the year ending June 2025, fewer than 29,000 projects were granted permission by councils, and planning approvals for new homes are at a record low. That's in the year that you, since you got elected. So if we're at record lows for house building, how on earth are you going to fulfil your pledge?
Well, Susanna, you bring home the dire inheritance that we picked up. And we've had this conversation before. Anyone who works in the development industry will know you can't turn things around overnight. The starts and completions that we're seeing come through in housing terms, these are applications that were submitted long ago in the last Parliament. So yes, the most recent planning application statistics are disappointing. We've got to pull every lever to remove those barriers to development. That's why we made those foundational changes to the National Planning Policy Framework in December last year. It's why we've got our planning and infrastructure bill going through Parliament right now. It's why we've got many, many other reforms in the pipeline. But there are green shoots, and I just trade statistics with you if you like. In the second quarter of this year, housing starts were up 29% on the previous year. So there are green shoots, but it was never going to be an overnight fix. And the 1.5 million target is a whole of Parliament target, not an annual target for that reason.
When people have their homes, they want their bins to be collected regularly and hygienically. But apparently, more than 2 million people across England are going to have to wait an extra week to have their bins emptied because Labour have dropped a pledge to maintain fortnightly collections. Please tell us this isn't going to be the case, because a bin collected every 3 weeks is not a hygienic way to run a council.
Well, different local authorities will make different decisions about how they order their bin services. My own council, for example...
Have you dropped the pledge for a 2-weekly bin collection?
I don't think we pledged to a 2-weekly bin collection in every local authority area. There's a level of discretion that local authorities have in terms of how they order their bin collections. I was going to say my local authority, for example, collects the serious bulk waste every 2 weeks. It doesn't collect recycling and food waste every 2 weeks. It collects those on a weekly basis. But that is up to individual local authorities.
But apparently in December 2024, the pledge to make sure black bag waste is collected every other week was scrapped by ministers.
Well, it's not my remit, I'm afraid, Susanna. I don't know the details of that particular policy. But as I say, in general terms, these are discretionary decisions for local authorities to make.
OK, very quickly before we lose you, one of the big infrastructure projects that you're announcing are the Mona offshore wind farm, that's in the Irish Sea, yep, and the Rampion offshore wind farm off the Sussex coast. Has the government had any pause for thought after President Trump's comments at the banquet last week when he referred to such projects as an expensive waste of money?
No, we're very clear that when it comes to making Britain a clean energy superpower, we need to sprint towards renewable deployment. That's why we're getting these big decisions on offshore wind farms made in a timely fashion. As I say, coming back to my original answer on the infrastructure point, these decisions are not sitting on the desks of ministers for months on end without a decisive choice being made. We're getting those in because that is the surest way to energy security in the long term, removing the chokehold of people like Putin on our throats in terms of our over-dependence on fossil fuel sources of energy.
Okay.
Matthew Pennycook, thank you very much indeed for joining us.